All right, so this is chapter 2. A lecture on chapter 2, culture and communication. To understand intercultural communication, we're going to break it down into 2 parts. Okay, so chapter 2 is really simple in that the first part is all about explaining culture, and then the second part is all about explaining communication. And so then it's our job to sort of put it together in a sense. And so the homework about what is culture comes in. You have all these different definitions that we listed. However, the book lists culture, the definitions on the PowerPoint as well. Learn patterns of perception, values, and behaviors shared by a group of people that is also dynamic and heterogeneous. It is not necessary to memorize that definition, okay? I want you to know what culture is in your own words, a way of life, the process of sharing thoughts and values and that kind of thing. However, if you memorize this sentence, in essence, you will memorize the 6 characteristics of culture that we're going to talk about. And it's necessary to be able to list those for a test. So if you like to list, then you can memorize it that way. But if you're kind of like, oh, if I just learn this one sentence, then I'll have it all, then there you go. So it's kind of a trick. The way, and then basically we break down this one sentence in the 6 characteristics of culture, okay? And you guys don't have a ton of space to write each of these out, so if you may need extra space whenever, or move up on the page and start writing. But the first one is that culture is learned, okay? We all do certain things as humans, okay? We all eat and sleep and seek shelter and have some sort of motivation to be loved and to protect ourselves, okay? That's not culture, okay? That's just human nature. But the way we do those things is our culture, right? So how do we eat? With our hands, with chopsticks, with a fork? Which side, do we do the fork and knife thing, or do we do the cut it up, put our knife down, pick up the, how do we do, how we eat? How do we act? How do we greet people? How to be male and female, right? What a man is supposed to do or look like, or what a woman is supposed to do or look like. We learn it all subconsciously. You want to write this down through the process of socialization. The process of socialization, that is those primary years of learning how to live, how to be who you are, right? And so the process of socialization usually is birth to puberty, when you are under the care of someone else completely, your parents or a guardian of some sort. And so you learn all of these other things subconsciously. Even that idea of like how you should sleep. I have a little child, and it's very valuable in America to learn to be independent from a very early age. And there are all these techniques to actually teach you or tell you how to teach your children to even sleep independently, right? So as soon as they can, put them in their own room, put them in a crib, learn how to fall asleep on their own, leave them in there, listen to the baby monitor. Well, my Chinese friends who came over when my son was 8 months old, it was bedtime, it was early, but he was getting cranky, and I was like, I gotta go put him to bed. I put him in his bed, he went to sleep, I turned on the baby monitor, and they were just completely fascinated, and they said, a child under 1 year of age would not sleep away from their parent. That's just not how they value, it's not this, let's be independent from as soon as possible, and that's an American value that we show culturally in different ways. Okay, here's how you eat, here's how you sleep, here's how you, we show independence even through all of those things. An example of how you know that culture is learned also is thinking of an adopted child. I've used the example before of, Tim and I had adopted a child from Vietnam. I talked about how their race would stay the same, right? But their culture won't, right? They're not going to come to America, live in my house from the time that they're 2 years old and older, and speak Chinese, speak Vietnamese, eat Vietnamese food, use Vietnamese chopsticks, listen to Vietnamese music. They're not going to do that, right? They're going to learn how to be an American. They're going to be an American. And so you learn, their race may still be Asian, but the culture will be mine, right? My home culture. And typically we embrace the culture we live in, even if we have hesitations about it, even if we don't like everything about the culture, we tend to in some way embrace it or defend it. The second one is that culture involves perception and values. Remember the Zoom book, right, and what page you're on and how you're perceiving the world around you. Perception means your way of looking at the world. It's like a lens through a camera. So any information we have stored in our brains sort of affects how we interpret new information. That's that idea of if you learn how someone else does something and it's different, you automatically compare it to the way that you've done it, right? It's just this natural thing. It's like this computer program. Culture is like this computer program sort of running our mind, telling us subconsciously how to conduct ourselves. The third thing is that culture involves feelings. Now, simply stated, we feel more comfortable in our own culture. We feel more comfortable in our own culture, where we have our comfort zone. Our own culture is our comfort zone. However, I'm sure you've heard of culture shock. The more you value and the stronger you feel, right? So like the more you love your culture, the more you feel connected to your home culture, the more disconnected you will feel from another culture. Okay? I mean, it makes sense, right? But some people don't feel as tied to their home culture, so they can kind of adapt more easily to other cultures. Me and my brother are perfect examples of opposites of this. I have two brothers, but my middle brother is Bubba, Mississippi, and so he loves being from Mississippi. He thinks that it's fine. I mean, I don't think anything's wrong with it, but he just loves being from the country. He has those deep roots that he has a lot of like pride in. If he were to go and travel somewhere, even as similar to us as England, right, he would have a huge eye-opening, like, awakening, and probably feel frustrated, right? These people are weird. These people are crazy. For me, I go somewhere, I'm not as deeply connected and proud, of my own culture. I don't have any disconnect with it. If I were to go somewhere like England with a lot of similarities, I would feel intrigued because I speak the same language. It would take a really different culture, somewhere in the bush of Africa or deep Southeastern Asia, for me to start going, whoo, like really being shaken up. So you have these feelings, and it kind of involves how you feel about your current culture, how strongly you feel about it, definitely affects how you feel about other cultures. The fourth one is that culture is shared, which implies what? That there are other people involved, right? No man is an island. Your home, your neighborhood, your family, a school, a club. Culture is a group experience because it's shared with people who experience and live in the same social environments. And there are different types of associations. This should be a subsection under number 4, okay? Different types of group associations. There are involuntary associations and involuntary. Involuntary group associations would be based on age. You can't control when you were born, right? So you share the generation with other people, and you have that generational culture. You can't change your race, so you share a culture of race with people. You share a culture of gender. Physical ability. Depending on your belief on the issue, sexual orientation, some people would argue that that is not something you choose, and so that is an involuntary group association. And then your family, as much as you hate it, you'd love to change your family. So I'll say those again, but it's not necessary to list them. Age, race, gender, physical ability, sexual orientation, depending on your belief, and family. There are voluntary ones, group associations, and these are things that you choose, groups that you choose to share this culture with, and those would be things like your profession, whatever you end up being. So, for example, teachers. There's definitely a teacher culture. There's definitely a nurse culture. There's definitely a businessman culture. Political associations, right? So, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, and your hobbies, right? So, basketball or basket weaving, whichever realm you go. Now there are some, so those are voluntary options for sharing culture, but there are some that at first you don't have any control over when you're born, but you do as you get older and become an adult. So there are involuntary ones that become voluntary. Excuse me. Religion would be one, so you may be born into a religion, but as you become an adult you can change that. Your nationality, you're born into a nationality, but you have the choice sometimes to change that. And your socioeconomic status, where you stand on the realm of wealthy or poor. You may be born poor and work your way up, or born wealthy and blow it all. But those are also group associations that we make that share culture. Socioeconomic is a huge cultural connection to people. The fifth one is that culture is expressed as behavior. What I mean by that is our culture comes out in the way we behave. I mean, that's exactly, it's what it says. I use the example how Americans are always taught to be very independent. We make our own decisions, once you reach a certain age. Sometimes that age is 16 for parents, sometimes it's 18, sometimes it's when you go to college, sometimes, different people have a different place, but typically in America it's a lot younger. You decide what you're going to do. Like, normally, American parents don't choose dating partners for their children, don't choose a major. Sometimes parents strongly influence their children's course of a degree, their career, what they're going to do, who they're going to marry. However, and so saying that, as an American, if I were to tell you, well, I'm going to be a veterinarian because my mom wants me to be, some people would literally look at me and say, you need to cut the cord. Like, if you don't want to be a veterinarian, don't be a veterinarian. Do what you want to do. But in other places, it doesn't feel controlling. Places like Mexico, they're not taught to be completely independent. They're taught to be what we call interdependent, right? Where, yes, I'm a grown person, but there's a heaviness or a weight of recognition that says everything I do affects everybody around me. And so they are always making decisions based on the group, be that the family group or the sibling group or marriage. They don't just say, well, this is my life, and I'm going to do what I want to do. It's really interesting because for us, we kind of feel like, well, man, I'd hate to be in a culture where I'm so controlled, right? I like to be independent. But if you're from that culture, that's how other people are making decisions based on you too. So it's like, that's how it is. It's not a sense of control. There's not like a lack of freedom that's occurring. It's just the way they're choosing to express what their decisions have been made, how they're choosing to show that behavior being, and so I think that that's a really interesting concept, because we've even mentioned before, like the arranged marriage thing, or children sleeping with their parents. In America, it's even like a medical issue, right? Like, you'll see all kinds of things, like if you have a child in your bed with you, it's dangerous, you can roll over, they can suffocate, they can get in the covers, it's just but in many, many parts of the world, for a child to not sleep with their parents seems cold and cruel and unloving, so it's a real interesting concept. There's a movie on the extra credit thing, Babies. Have you guys seen Babies? You have seen it?
I think so.
Yeah, it follows 4 children from like birth to a little after their first year.
There's no talking.
There's no talking. Yeah, there's no talking. It is a child from San Francisco, Tokyo, I think Namibia, Africa, and Mongolia. And it just follows like what they do, and it's so interesting to see. I mean, like the kid in Mongolia is just like laying in the bed, and a rooster walks by. Like, the mom's nowhere to be found, and the rooster's like just looking at the baby. And of course, any American parent would be like, that rooster's gonna pluck, their eyes out. I mean, there's just like, so on some hand we're super independent, and then we're also super overprotective, right? We've got this weird mix of behavior that we're showing. The sixth one is that culture is dynamic, and it says on the PowerPoint it's wrong. It should say that culture is dynamic and heterogeneous. So add that word. The final term is that it's dynamic and heterogeneous. Dynamic meaning that it's changing, heterogeneous meaning that it's varied, it's diverse. And the fact that culture changes can be a source of conflict, and what that looks like. The changing role of the woman in society, we've discussed before, how it's constantly evolving or regressing, or however you want to see it. And heterogeneous meaning that so I can say Americans want their children to be independent. However, and so they don't sleep with their children. Okay, they don't sleep with their babies. That's just a generalization. That's not true for every person. There's a wide variety within that concept. There are lots of women in America who sleep with their children. There are lots of women in America who go to sleep with their children and then put them in their bed. There are a lot of women who put their children in the bed, but when they wake up, they bring them back to their bed, or they start out. I mean, so there's like this whole variety within any concept. So to just say American mothers are forcing independence, from an early time is not true for every American mother. You see what I mean? So like, yes, we make these generalizations, but that's how we get stereotypes too. Mm-hmm. So to recognize that culture is varied within itself, there are differences. So there are some people in Mexico who make their own decisions and who say, I'm not going to be a veterinarian, even if you wanted me to be, So don't fall into stereotyping just because of that, So the idea of an American or the Chinese is not just one picture of culture. It's many, many, many pictures of culture. Table 2-3. You guys mark this down so that we can get it for you. In table 2-1, talking about behaviors and changing, and this is on page 37. In Thailand, Thai people greet each other with a Y greeting, which is holding their hands together at the chest like a prayer and then giving a little bow. So it's one way they express themselves in their behavior. Egypt, using the left hand alone to exchange an item with an Egyptian is considered rude. The French expect promptness and they are not accustomed to standing in line. Germans often bang their fist on the table to show appreciation at the end of a meeting. One of my German friends actually said they do that in lectures, in like lecture halls. They go to a large university where there are 500 students in a lecture hall. The lecture's over, professors putting up stuff, and the students can kind of do that. In Japan, when you are offered a gift, you must first refuse it once, modestly and serenely, and then you should accept it using both hands. This is an interesting thing, the idea of rejecting a gift. In America, I say, do you want some coffee? And you say yes or no, right? And if you say yes, I get coffee, and you say no, I'm like, all right. Most Asian cultures at least will reject it once. Sometimes they have a rule of like 3, like, would you like something to eat? No, I'm fine. Wait a minute. Okay, I have some crackers and cheese. Would you like some crackers and cheese? No, really, I'm okay. I'm okay, thank you. I have some crackers. Would you like some crackers? Okay, thank you. Yes, that'd be great. I mean, it's a real, you feel like it's a cat and mouse game, but it can get really sticky. True story from students who were in my class in the past. This was back when Kroger was at the old Kroger up here on Spring Ridge, and we did not have a lot of international students at the time. I mean, a handful, And so it happened that I actually had both of these students. The Chinese girls I had previously, and then the American I had in class at the time of the incident. So the Chinese girls go to the grocery store and they're walking back, 2 Chinese girls, and they're still in the parking lot, right? So they're just leaving Kroger. And a girl in my class, there were 2 American girls in the car, and they were headed back to MC. Assuming that these girls were also headed back to MC, they stopped and asked if they went to MC. Yes, made a little small talk and said, would you like a ride? And the Chinese girl said, no, it's fine. We can walk. Of course, they had their hands full of groceries. Not knowing what to do, the American, she told me, basically what happened was she was like, okay, well, we'll see you at the dorm sometime, I hope, and drove off. Well, the American's thinking, I don't know what to do in this situation, right? I don't want to make them ride with me, but they said no. So if I didn't, I would have just said no. So, okay, maybe they wanted to walk. Maybe they were afraid of riding in an American car, whatever. They just didn't know. Of course, the Chinese girls were sitting there going, wait, they just left. Like they were expecting them to ask again, and because they did want to ride, but it was just not culturally acceptable to just say yes right away. That seemed a little ambitious or something. So it's supposed to be a rejection. So and so then I told this story. I had somebody come back another time. They were in the cafeteria, and they got to that point in the cafeteria where either person could go, kind of, no, you go, you know. And so the American told the Asian guy, go ahead. And the Asian said, no, you go ahead. And the American stopped and said, no, please. And so the Asian went the second time. And he thought, like, was that the, you know, like, would he have thought I was rude if I was like, okay, I'll go, you know, like what was happening. So I think it's really interesting. Some of these things really show themselves and you don't know why, but it's just culturally expected. We'll watch a video later in the semester, and an example is given where a Nigerian does not say no to his friend, but he continues to hint that doing this favor for him, taking him to the airport, would be a really big inconvenience. But he keeps hinting, well, I guess I can do this instead. So the American's like, sweet, I got to ride to the airport. And later in the interview, I love what the Nigerian says, although I think he's an actor because his Nigerian accent's bad. But he says, it's not in my culture to have to say no. It's in my culture, it's his job to make sure that I don't have to, right? Like it's your job to make sure I don't have to say no, that I'm not put in that position. It's not, I can't say no, but for you to also be playing this culture game with me, to be doing my culture, you would not put me in a position. I think that's really interesting perspective. Back to the table. When Israelis invite someone to their home, it's an important gesture, so you should bring a book as a gift. In Spain, after a meal, you place your utensils together on the plate. Otherwise, your Spanish host would think you're not satisfied. And there are rules like that all over the world that are real interesting. We have a Malaysian friend, and his parents came over and wanted to cook dinner for a lot of people in our church, like 4 or 5 of us over at our house. So his mom's cooking, and Tim, my husband, was eating, you know, I can't remember what they had, some kind of curry, I think, and rice. And they had a bowl, and so he would eat it, and he would finish it. And then, I don't know what he was doing, but whatever he was doing with his utensils in his bowl, he was basically signifying for more. They filled his bowl up, like on the 4th time, finally on the 4th time, our friend saw what was happening. Because then Tim would say, no, I'm full, and they would continue to say, no, eat. So then Tim would eat more, and he's like, okay, I keep eating. And the dad was sitting by Tim, and he's like, no, eat. And so he would eat some more, and then whatever he would do at the end of the bowl signified, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was either finishing the whole bowl and keeping his spoon in it, or putting his spoon out of it, whatever it was. Finally, our friend looked over and was like, no, Tim, are you hungry or are you full? And Tim's like, I'm going to bust, like, if I eat anymore. So he kind of explained. It was really funny because, you know, here our friend's mom is just making sure that all the guests are satisfied, you know. At the same time, it was a compliment that he kept wanting more, however. And then in French Polynesia, as well as in other places of the world, it's not necessary to tip. But in French Polynesia, it says that people would give a small gift instead. Interesting. Or some would say interesting. So that's kind of the first half of Chapter 2, the 6 characteristics of culture. Since we're videoing, maybe you can write down some questions if you want to come back to it, and we can discuss it after. And for people on the video, write down your questions and we'll bring them up in class. On the next slide, in the second half of Chapter 2, is communication and defining communication. Sort of the same thing with the definition. We define culture, now we define communication. You learn this definition, you'll learn you won't learn all of them, but you'll learn some of the characteristics that you have to go through. However, if you're a list person, just do it that way. The definition of your book says, a symbolic process whereby meaning is shared and negotiated. Shared and negotiated. Okay, so there are also 6 characteristics about communication. The hard thing about this first unit in studying, Chapter 1 has 6 imperatives for studying intercultural communication and 4 ways to be an ethical student of culture. Chapter 2 has 6 characteristics of culture, 6 characteristics of communication, 4 barriers to interculture. I mean, so it's like 6, it's really hectic because there are a lot of lists of 6 and 4s. So just telling you now to try to come up with a way to keep those separate from yourself. I don't know the way to do that. I'm just telling you a heads up. We're going to go through 6 again. And these are a little bit faster. First one is communication is symbolic. Symbol here refers to any types of words or gestures that we use to communicate. Okay, so we use symbols. Our actual words are symbols. Our hand gestures are symbols. When we turn away from someone, it's a symbol of communicating that we don't want to talk to them. When we cross our hands like this, it can be a symbol of many things. Maybe I'm cold, maybe I'm angry. And some symbols in our culture are universal, and some things are just kind of unique to smaller groups of your friends, or because I'm pretty sure most of the world doesn't really know that this means. Is that right? Right over left. That this is LT. What is LT to the rest of the world? But it is a symbol in a group of people, right? And it means something. 2, communication is a process. Now, it's a process that involves people, okay, the person who's sending a message and the person who's receiving the message. The message itself, the way that the message is communicated, a channel through which the message is communicated, which means, is it a cell phone? Is it a lecture? Is it a YouTube video? Is it a text message? What channel are we conveying this message? And then the context. We're going to define context in a little bit, but context is just that physical or social setting, right? What's the setting right here? The conference room, right? What's the setting if you're on the video? It's your computer. Are you in the computer lab? Are you in your dorm room? Are you on your iPhone just to say that you watched it and you didn't really care? What's the setting? 3, communication involves sharing and negotiating meaning. People have to agree on the meaning for it to be true communication, okay? A message can have a lot of different meanings. She is hot, right? Like, I can mean she is attractive, she is angry, or she is warm, right? Well, if I just say those words, in your head, you jump to one of those assumptions. For it to be good communication, we need to negotiate and recognize that there could be multiple. So I say she is hot, and you say, do you mean she's attractive? No, I mean she's like sweating, right? So we've negotiated what that meaning is, so that we can agree on it. Communication is dynamic, ongoing. It's not the single event. We're always actively involved in the communication process. We're creating and sharing meaning at all times. We're saying things, and we're projecting things. Students do this a lot. Teachers do this a lot. Like, students who are sitting there taking notes in class, or doing something else in class, whatever they're doing, they're communicating to me. Either I'm interested, I'm bored, I'd rather be on Facebook, I'm confused. They do, they show all these different things, although they say nothing, right? They sit there and listen to a lecture. And so it's kind of constantly. Now, sometimes, then I call them out, then they're embarrassed, then they try to pay attention, so like we're moving on with that. Number 5, communication does not have to be intentional. And I think that's really important. We're communicating even if we don't mean to, right? We may not even be aware that we sent a message. So I saw you or you saw me in the cafeteria and you thought I looked at you and then I looked away. In reality, I might not have seen you and I just looked away. You misread that and thought I must be mad at you and I'm ignoring you, right? So, we're constantly communicating something, and we don't need to be like hypersensitive, like, oh no, what am I communicating if I do this? Oh no, I don't want to hurt their feelings, and then you're annoying, right? Because it's too much. But there are times when you can be really conscious of it, especially when you learn nonverbals from another country. You can learn, oh, well, maybe I'm not supposed to shake an older man's hand, right? I'm supposed to just bow my head a little bit and say hi, or just depends. So there are things you can learn to be better about, but communication does not have to be intentional. And finally, and this one's really important, communication is receiver-oriented. Communication depends on how a receiver may interpret the message. Have you ever heard the saying, like, don't judge me by my actions, judge me by my intentions? Like, I didn't mean it that way. Or if, for me, sometimes it's really funny. I hear, like, boyfriend girlfriend fight in my head when I say this, but I hear that's not what you said, or it's not what you said, it's what you didn't say. It's that idea that there were other things involved, and it's how it goes in. Realize that there's a strong possibility that you can be misunderstood, and it's not anybody's fault, but what matters is what they hear. And that's why that whole thing about therapy and counseling, what I hear you say is, that's why that's a really big deal, because the receiver wants to make sure that they heard it correctly. So those are the 6 characteristics of communication. Going through and combining the two, how do they collide? We talked a little bit already about behavior and how behavior is shown through different cultures. But culture absolutely influences the way we communicate with people. Cultural worldview and values. I don't know if that page number on the, it's on page 42, table 2-3. Values have to do with what we consider to be right and wrong, kind of like ethics, or good and bad. And collectively, these values represent a worldview. Now, what is a worldview? That's one of the terms, and it's on your study guide. A worldview is the definition is very simple. It's the way of looking at the world. Wow, like mind-blowing, right? But it's how all of this kind of goes in together, and you view the world, value the world. Members of a culture create a worldview, which in turn influences communication. How? Okay, well, looking at the table on 42, there are ideas and then a range of values that kind of go across, and we'll get you a copy of that. Human nature, for example. Is the worldview on human nature, your worldview, cultural worldview, that human nature is basically good, basically evil, or a mixture of both? When I was in college, back when people shopped at North Park Mall, I was at North Park, and I saw a lady pushing a baby in a stroller, and now I recognize the baby to be really young, like 3 or 4 months old, not sitting up, not crawling, real young. And I had a little black onesie, like a t-shirt thing that snaps under the diaper, and in white, all capital letters, it said sinner, S-I-N-N-E-R. I'll never forget it. Obviously, this mother had a particular worldview that human nature is basically evil, and the way she chose to show that was through, now, having a 1 and a 2-year-old of my own, I also very strongly believe that children are born evil. And that's actually a Christian worldview, to say that we are born in sin and we need a redeemer to save us from the evil. However, other religions like Buddhism would believe that we are basically good, that there's this deep in the core of each soul is a light, okay? And the goal of all of life is to ignore the bad that surrounds you to find the light within you, to be enlightened. And so that worldview would say that humans are basically good. And that comes out in a lot of things, like even in funny things, like me talking about my 2-year-old. Like, yeah, kids are born selfish, The other things that go with that are relationships between humans and nature. Does nature dominate? Like, should we give power to nature? Should humans be able to control nature, or is there harmony between the two? There are cultures that are very nature dominant, right? That give into the powers that be. I recently saw Beast of the Southern Wild. I don't know if you guys saw that, but they lived in a levee, and everything sort of surrounded on like the flooding and the gates, and they sort of lived through. They just managed through it all. They didn't try to stop it. But other places would say, well, we're human and we have the power to build dams, cut down trees, build, like all of these things prevent forest fires, which wildfires do have an ability to be profitable to the wildlife as a whole. So, where does that look? Relationships between human, we've talked about this, are we individual? Are we group oriented? And then this preferred idea of personality, are we a doing people, or a being people, or growing people? We just be who we are, yeah, man. Like, I think of the Caribbean anytime I think of just chilling out. Americans tend to be a very doing culture. We have to-do lists. I woke up this morning, I had insomnia, woke up at like 4:30, and I spent, good 15, 20 minutes just making a list of the things to pack for the beach in 2 weeks. I mean, it's like, we're constantly thinking of things. Time orientation. Are we thinking of the future? Do we focus on the past? Are we just in the now? Those are different types of world views that we look at. And we'll talk a little bit more about those on the second table. Going into that, it is on page 47, table 2-4, and there are some of these in the PowerPoint of what they are, but I'll give some more details. Other cultural values that are shown in worldview, and specifically this idea of power distance. Okay, and the thing about these tables, the things about these two things is what I want you to do, and what I want you to do even for the test. Although yes, I want you to know what they mean. Find yourself on the spectrum. Where does your worldview fall? Do you believe that humans are basically good, basically evil? Do you believe that nature should control things, or we should work together? Find yourself on the spectrum of these. Same thing with this, power distance. This is the extent into which individuals accept the idea that power is distributed unequally. That sounds backwards to say. So basically, how comfortable are you with hierarchy? Okay, in what's called low power distance. Okay, if a society is considered low power distance, they have less hierarchy. That's like America, right? And although there's a respect for different levels, there's also like a casualness, right? So I'm the teacher, you're the student, me teacher, you're a student, right? But there's not like this unapproachable thing, right? There's this thing where we can also talk about something personal, right? We can turn that video camera off, or we can be in the middle of class, and I'll also tell you the crazy story about my kid yesterday. Like there are things that we do. If you have a question, you can ask directly to me. There's not a formal process of getting an answer. You can send an email, things like that. People who are older than you, or if you in a work situation, often in America you would have their cell phone numbers, people higher up. But in a high power distance society, okay, there's a lot of hierarchy accepted. Those relationships between boss and subordinate, or teacher and student, or mother and child even, is very formal. Okay, there's definitely a level, and you can see that even that parent-child thing in America. We can see that there's not a large gap there. Like sometimes American mothers struggle because, hey, you don't need to be their buddy, you need to be their mom. That concept. It's because we're very low power. Other low power societies listed in your text are Denmark and Israel and the United States. Am I breaking your hands from writing? But high power societies, they list 3: Mexico, the Philippines, and India. So Asia, South America, a little bit more higher power. I said Mexico, Philippines, and India. The second value orientation issue would be masculinity and femininity. Now, what I don't mean is how manly are your men, or I don't know what I'm saying. What I am saying is there are certain values that are considered masculine worldwide. Okay, so whether the woman does it or the man does it, they're considered a masculine value. Those values are things like ambition, acquisition of material goods. Right, so if the woman is the one out there working and doing manual labor, that's fine. It's still considered a masculine society, right, or a masculine task that she's doing. Femininity would be values of service and nurturing. So societies as a whole, okay, countries like Japan, Austria, and Mexico, they value those masculine things. They value ambition. They value acquisition of material goods. They value physical labor efforts, right? Get this done and do this. But there are some feminine values. It's funny that they're all next to each other. The text says Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And one way that they show that they value some of these nurturing qualities is they give really, really long paid maternity and paternity leave. Like men in some of these countries can get like 6 months off of work paid when their wives have a baby. So it's not what are the men doing or what are the women doing. It's what are the worldview values. Is it a softer, more feminine culture, right? Less strict and hard, which would be more masculine. In the U.S., we're sort of in the middle, honestly, and we're really gender specific about it. We're really interested in the men being masculine and the women being feminine, right? Whereas in other cultures, maybe the whole culture values a certain attribute. So what's the worldview of the culture there? The third thing, I love to talk about this one, is uncertainty avoidance, okay? This basically means how comfortable are you with ambiguity, or how much do you feel threatened if you're in an ambiguous situation, or prefer structure, right? This is that thing where if I say, read chapter 3, read chapter 3 and summarize it for me by Wednesday, and you're going to get a test grade for it. See ya. Usually half of the class, or less than half really, just are like, all right, and they go and they do what they think I'm talking about, they summarize it, they turn it in on Wednesday, and they think to themselves, well, that's not what she wants, that's her fault, she didn't tell me anything different, okay? The other, probably 3/4 of the class will either raise their hands before they leave and ask a lot of follow-up questions, or send me 3 emails. Do you want this bullet pointed or an essay? Do we need outside sources to validify this? Do you want me to do headings and subheadings or write it like a report? I mean, it's like, summarize chapter 3, people, and so it's just like, well, there's so many ways to summarize chapter 3. I just want to make sure, It's really funny to me. I have had to learn to give a lot more structure because I'm one who thinks, well, that's what you said, and it's your fault if it's wrong, right? And so a reduction of rules is actually the U.S. We actually give a lot of flexibility. So if you have a weak uncertainty avoidance, means you like less rules, and it talks about the U.S., Great Britain, and Hong Kong. If you have a stronger sense, you like more formality, more extensive rules. Those cultures would be Greece, Portugal, and Japan. That's one area if you're trying to decide where to live overseas or where to go overseas. That's something you should probably look into, because that can create a lot of frustration if people are going to be upfront with you and give you a lot of structure and let you know, or if you have a lot of freedom.
What is the third country?
The third country in strong, Greece, Portugal, and Japan for the strong one. And then the fourth one is long-term versus short-term. This is this idea of orientation to life. Short-term orientation to life, focus on quick results, has a lot of social pressure to have material possessions that other people have. They may overspend, right? This is what I want, and I want it now, right? I've got $100. This dress costs $90. I might have a wedding to go to in October. Better get the dress now. I'll still have $10 in case something comes up. I need the dress now. Versus someone like my husband who would say, I don't even know if I'm going to a wedding in October. I don't really know what I could spend it on. And he just puts it away and waits and waits and waits and waits. We laugh because I'm the spender. I'm the short-term, and once we say we want something, I'm ready to get it now. Okay, we saved money to buy, when we had 2 kids, we got a minivan. I'm a minivan mom, but I'm proud of it now because I'm telling you, I love my minivan now. When I finally agreed to get a minivan, we had our child in April, and we were still saving money for it, right? So we had a few months. We got it in June, but we had a few months of being in a really tight, small car. We had a Camry with 2 car seats, and an 18-month-old and a newborn, and getting in and out. And so as soon as we decided this is what we're going to get and this is what we're saving for, of course my husband only wanted to pay cash. So it was never, I was like, oh, let's get one this month. We don't have enough money. Oh, and he's like, we can just wait till it comes about, make sure we're, it was just so much stress about that. And he thinks long term like that. He thinks if he got $100, he thinks put it in retirement. It's only $100. He's like, yeah, it's $100. It's $100. Go, let's treat our friends to sushi. And he's like, what am I going to do with you? But like we each get Christmas money, and so we do have shared accounts, but when we get birthday or Christmas money, it's completely ours, and we have it for whatever we want. We always get about the same amount of money because everybody gives us the same thing, and if somebody gives us a joint gift, we split it, or we use it for like a date or something we can do together. And I'm not kidding, this has happened, we've been together for 5 years, or married 5 years. In that time, he never uses his Christmas money, never uses his Christmas money, or birthday money, or graduation money, or anything else, so he's just got, and so when we'd been married about a year and a half, something came up, and we had an opportunity to buy an upright piano at an estate my dad was at for a decent price, and we didn't have the money in our budget that month, because we budget each month. He's like, oh, I guess I can just use my Christmas. He goes in his room and he's like, let's just buy the piano with my Christmas money. Like, okay, And then last year, same thing. So then he did not spend it again for a really long time, and it was in the middle of the summer, and he just thought, I think I'd like an iPad. Well, we don't have money for an iPad, and his computer's kind of dying, and I have a computer, so why don't you get an iPad, and I'll get a computer, I'll use my computer, and then we're good. This is the school's, by the way. And I was like, well, okay, we need to save money monthly. And he's like, well, I mean, I'll just send this for me. Maybe we'll get to use it and share it. I'll just use he goes in the back, gets the money out of his envelope. We go to the Apple store, and they're like, how would you like to pay for this? He goes, can I just pay cash? They're like, okay. Because he just thinks about it. He's like, let's just wait until there's something I need and want. And I'm like, I don't have any Christmas money now, right? Like, my Christmas money was gone in March. I tried. I was like, I even gave him some of my Christmas money to put back. And I was like, don't give this to me. Let me save it. It's gone. So it's this idea, long term, no matter how long things take, don't cut corners. Do it right. That's the other thing about Tim. Like, I'll get something cheaper faster, and he will get something more expensive and quality for long. You know what I mean? He'll wait for that. So, kind of what's your worldview? Context, let's change the subject a little bit to define context in communication. I don't know why people get this wrong on a test. Maybe I'm trying to trick them, but I'm not. But the definition of context is a physical or social setting. It's where you are, right? So physical context is physically where you are. My physical context right now is I'm in a chair, in a conference room, in Jennings, at Mississippi College, in Clinton, right? I mean, there's a physical, in a classroom, right? This is physical context. And communication changes based on where you are, right? The social context of this setting is lecture, right? There's a lecture occurring, although I'm sitting down, and we're communicating in that way, right? This is the type of communication is the social context, teacher to student to video camera, lecture, okay? Now that social context does change when you go certain places. I probably will look different and talk differently to you if I see you in Walmart. And that may look different if you come to my church. And that may look different if we run into each other in the bar, right? We'll both ignore each other because we go to Mississippi College. And so, the context of where you are, the way you speak, right, changes in a social context. So I could be in this room, the physical context could stay the same. I'm in here with students. The words I say, the way I speak is this way. My colleagues come in here, and I have a little bit of a different attitude, a little bit of a different verbiage, right? The physical context stayed the same, but the social context changed. My family comes in here, and it's completely different. If it's just my son and I, my 2-year-old, our conversation is going to look really different. Our social context is really different, but the physical stays the same. But a physical context is just where you are. And the social context is like how the relationships in this are occurring. Does that make sense? I'm just making sure. We do have some different types of context, the physical and social. There are also political and historical. Political contexts are really things like reactions to political issues. So Rand Paul and the filibuster recently, a protest, a debate, right? Like we're here for this purpose. is a political and a historical context. Historical context, the best example that I could really give you would be the N-word, okay? That's not appropriate to use, right, and it's considered extremely derogatory. However, you can change the N-word to make it a little less formal. And if you are African American, speaking to other African Americans, there may be more flexibility to use the N-word, but there's not much flexibility for white people to use the N-word. Why? Historical context, right? The history and the weight that holds in history. So it's not the word itself. It's not anything about the letters or the sound of the word. It's who's saying it, when they're saying it, how they're saying it, and the context of history that it belongs to. Almost every society has something like this. Jews in Europe, right, from World War II and the Holocaust. There's some historical context, things that occurred you shouldn't say, you shouldn't do. So there are contexts within communication. Finally, I want to walk through 4 barriers to intercultural communication. Okay? Once again, a list of 4. And I think that these are really interesting to kind of walk through. They build on themselves. You do need to list these. You do need to know what they are and in what order that they come. But these are things that get in the way of effectively communicating with people of other cultures, races, countries. Okay? I'm drinking my coffee. The first one is ethnocentrism, maybe a new vocabulary word. This is the idea, a belief, that one's own cultural group is superior to other cultural groups. Or my way is better than your way. My culture is better than your culture. Well, that's not bad in and of itself. That's a very natural thing, because let's be honest. If I did not think that what I was doing was the best thing to do, I would do something else. People always do what they think is the best thing. Okay, so I mean, in positive terms, giving everybody the benefit of the doubt. So let's talk about the way to raise children. Okay, in my culture, I believe that this is the way to raise children, and this is the way to discipline children, and this is the way to get children to sleep. In another culture, they believe it to be a different way. Now, I love my children. I'm not going to do it one way just because America or a culture says this is how you have to do it. I do it this way because I really believe it's best, right? Otherwise, I'd do it. I mean, I love my children too much to give them second best. So that's not a bad thing. It's not bad to say that the way I'm doing it is best. It does become a problem when you do not give value to another way. Okay? So it becomes a problem when I say my way is best and your way is bad versus my way is best and your way is fine for you too. You see what I'm saying? So ethnocentrism, the definition is just believing that your way is better than other things. Well, okay. Everybody wants to believe that. That's not the problem. It gets in the way where it becomes a barrier is when it gets to the point where you cannot value a different way, where you can't say, that's fine for you. This is how I do it, and this is how you do it, and that's okay. I kind of agreeing to disagree. Now, some things and some values are not going to be, well, that's fine for you, and this is fine for me. And I'm not trying to be extreme with that. Of course, things like spirituality, Christianity, if you believe that Christ is the Savior of the world, and they believe, that our ancestors are people who are giving us power after death. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm probably not going to say, my way is best for me, and your way is okay for you. However, I can respect that and politely disagree. So there's a way that doesn't have to be a barrier, where it just says, no, you're stupid. Like my way is awesome and your way is dumb. Like that's where it kind of becomes a problem. So it's really, really hard to see your own ethnocentrism. It's really, really, really hard to like figure out where because it's part of everything. It's part of all of your culture. It's like everything you know, this is the best way. Now, I'll tell you, when you have children, you will find everyone else's ethnocentrism because they will tell you the best way. They will tell you the way you should do things, and I think that that's funny. The second thing it builds on is ethnocentrism, and then it builds onto stereotypes. Stereotypes are a widely held belief about a group of people, a way of generalization, a way of categorizing people. Now, we talked about this before. It can be helpful, right, as a mental shortcut. It's not always this terrible thing, but it can be harmful when they're held to so rigidly, right? When you put people, it's natural and it fills a social function to put people in a box. It becomes a stereotype and it's a problem when you don't let people out of that box. Does that make sense? So you can automatically have a prejudgment of sorts, but then make sure you're getting to know the person. And we talked about before that stereotypes can be positive, right? All Chinese people are good at math, but they're still not good because they're not truth-telling and they can cause some problems. Where do we learn stereotypes? We learn stereotypes from a couple of different ways, honestly. We either from being told a stereotype or experiencing something with a group of people. So experiences or words. Words can be just from your family. You're always told that. You always hear it. Or from a movie or from music, right? Some kind of words build stereotypes. Or an experience. You know, say I was robbed by two guys from Nepal, right? Then I am going to potentially stereotype, and my friends who hear the story are potentially going to stereotype Nepalese men as dangerous, right? You see what I mean? So if I have an experience, or if someone I know has had an experience with a certain group of people, that does give itself to that. However, that experience is genuine and valid, the stereotype is not. So the next time I meet Nepalese people, I don't need to be afraid of being robbed, right? Otherwise, I'm fueling the stereotype. So attempting to examine stereotypes we hold about others is really key to building meaningful cross-cultural relationships, because once stereotypes are established, they're really, really hard to change. They're really hard to change. Stereotypes are a widely held belief. Prejudice is the third one. Builds off of stereotypes. Stereotypes are a belief. Prejudice is a negative attitude towards a cultural group based on little or no experience. It's just an attitude you feel. So stereotypes tell us what a group is like, while prejudice would tell us how to feel about that group. Okay? Stereotypes sort of justify our prejudice. We don't like those people. Why? We don't like Nepalese people. Why? Because all the men steal. They all rob people, right? Like, so we don't like them now. That's a prejudice. Why are we prejudiced? I hate to say this, but there's some sort of social function there. It's this idea that we're to be accepted, to reinforce our own beliefs, or to maybe fulfill a need to be positive about our own group. We're always to put other people down is always subconsciously trying to raise yourself up, which is why the gospel is so backwards, right? It says, humble yourself before others, lift others up. And that's the gospel message, but it's very natural, it's very in our nature to raise ourselves up, right? And so prejudice is a byproduct of that. To put other people down is to naturally raise ourselves up. And there are three different kinds of prejudice that we'll talk about, and I think they're really interesting. I want you to ask yourself if you've ever experienced or do have any of this. The first one's tokenism. This is really funny to me. These are people who go out of their way to prove that they're not prejudiced. Like, they kind of will have a lot of, or at least a couple of relationships that may be very unimportant or they're sort of surface level relationships, just to show that they are really diverse. See, I'm not prejudiced. This is my black friend. And you've heard this idea, like a token black friend, a token white friend, a token Chinese friend. Look how I love international students. This is my conversation partner, right? You go over and beyond just to show, or to yourself. It's not just showing to other people. It's to try to make yourself feel better. But they're very surfacey. Are they really your friends? Like, did you tell them your secrets? You know, do you tell them what you're worried about? Do they pray for you? Do you, or are you just, hey, what's up? And then it's over, The second one is what I grew up with. And I think it's very common here in the South, but it's arm's length prejudice. And this is where people engage in friendly and positive behavior towards people of another group, but it can't get closer. They avoid closer contact. So the idea arm's length, right? You can be this close, but not this close. I grew up, I went to public school, Pearl, Mississippi, and it was always kind of a rule, and my parents would actually say these words: oh, you can have black friends, they just can't spend the night. You can have black friends, but they just don't come to our birthday parties. And I played basketball in high school, at Brandon High School, so, oh, you can be friends with the black guys on the basketball team, you just can't date them, right? So that's super common. Have you heard that before, right? I mean, that, and our parents' generation would probably try to really argue that that's not prejudice. Mm-hmm. But it is, and it has a name. It's arm's length. It's like, so you're good enough for this, but not good enough for something else. You're not good enough to come closer. You can't go to their house or something like that. I think that's a real disservice to us, because we tend to fake ourselves out and think, oh, I'm not prejudiced because, obviously I can be friends with them, So, and my parents came a long way. I just to give a little bit of credit to them, in high school I ended up becoming really close to a black girl on a basketball team, and she did end up spending the night and coming to birthday parties and hanging out a lot. Like, she was a real friend, and through me being real friends with her, my parents became a lot more comfortable, and that kind of thing. So it was kind of interesting, but that was the rule, at first. The last one is colorblind. There's a comment on, I hope it's page 55. It is. No, not 55. 59. This is the colorblind approach to prejudice, is to basically believe that to improve race relations is to not notice color. Okay. Here is a quote from a student. The message I got from teachers at the school and other people was that the way to not be racist was to pretend that you don't see any differences between people. And so everyone had feelings about race, but nobody talked, and there was no place to talk about those things. And you only have to treat everyone as an individual, and everything will be okay. In my high school class, I asked a question about civil rights movement and racism, and the answer I got was that basically everything was fine now. To ignore race, and we'll talk about this a little more in chapter 4, to ignore someone's race or culture is not the way to go. It does not improve racism or prejudice. What it does is say that their identity, say that that group's history is not important. So it takes away a little bit